Now to matters trade, where China continues to be a key trading partner for Kenya, but the trade imbalance between the two nations stood at $2.8 billion as at November 2015. CNBC Africa's Bonney Tunya spoke to Kiprono Kittony, the national chairman of the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce, on opportunities that can help bridge that gap. Here's that conversation.
This relationship of China and Kenya seems very obvious. However, also what jumps at people is the imbalance thereof, and it's understandable based on the development levels of the different partners. But what would be the ideal for Kenya-China relationship going forward?
The relationship between Kenya and China, it has a far stronger historical link than we imagine. Visiting a museum in China, we actually found evidence of a Chinese sea voyage that came into the East African coast about 400 years ago.
Right.
So it is a long-standing historical relationship. And China has been very, very proactive in its foray into not just Kenya, but into the continent of Africa.
Right.
And they have tended to focus a lot on infrastructure investment, particularly on roads, on rail linkage, on energy and sanitation, as well as water resources. And really, these are the prerequisites for any economy to grow. So really, the investment that they have made in these sectors obviously speak very much to the needs that we have in this part of the world.
Right.
With reference to the imbalance, it is true that there is a huge imbalance. In fact, it is massive. And there is a need for that to be redressed, and I would like to speak about that a bit later.
Right. Let's still, access to markets. This remains a big challenge, whether you're talking about intra-Africa trade or global trade, and obviously it's linked to the different laws that run these different jurisdictions. For example, what are some of the challenges, in your view, limit access of Kenyan products and services to the Chinese market? Okay,
first of all, you must appreciate that there's a huge cultural divide. I mean, if you look at even the cuisine of the Chinese, the type of tea that we drink in Kenya is not the type of tea that they drink in China.
Right.
So I think there's a real need for us to also, as a country with an export focus, look at the nuances of the market that we are focusing. Mm-hmm. And if the Chinese, I mean, we need to look at what type of teas would be ideal for their market. Mm-hmm. How do they want their coffee? Is the coffee that we produce suited to the Chinese palate? And I think we also really need to look inwards at our own capacity in terms of production volumes, in terms of our competitive advantages. But I see huge opportunity in hides and skins. I see huge opportunity in fisheries.
Right. So these are new areas. They're not the traditional areas that we used to trade between the two countries.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, there's a huge opportunity. Hides and skins, fisheries, of course, the traditional, coffee and teas, cut flowers. And, we must bear in mind that China is a really massive economy, and if we can get a foothold into that economy, and I do think that there is a real need for a case to be made to the Chinese government to grant us greater market access.
Right.
But at the same time, also look inwards at our own capacity to produce sufficient volumes to meet their demands.
Right.
And the sustainability of some of these industries, like I mentioned, fisheries. Yes, we do have a thriving, natural fishing industry in Kenya, but are we investing in it sufficiently to make it sustainable? And my answer to that is that I think that a lot of work needs to be done on fisheries.
Right. Yeah. What about standardization? Because a lot of this relationship has been stereotyped that a lot of counterfeit products or substandard products from the Asian markets are flooded into the African markets as an outlet or are dumped here. The standards body in Kenya has obviously had a tough time trying to sort these out. Can this be addressed going forward?
I think, first of all, we need to acknowledge one fact, that there is a direct correlation between standards and levels of economy. If you look at the sophisticated markets of Western Europe and North America, their standard bureaus, benchmark their products and services at a far higher level than we do in this part of the world.
Right, yes.
So a lot of the Chinese products, the mass products that come in from China, are making their way into this market. Are they of the same superior standard that we find in a lot of the commodities that we get from the West? Perhaps not. But again, it speaks to our level of, the level of our economy. We are at 1232 USD per annum GDP per capita. So there will always, obviously, at that low level of income, be a demand for that quality of good because that would also be, it'll also inform a lower price.
Right.
Yes.
Infrastructure has obviously also driven this relationship, and for a moment we've been looking at the Chinese as our grant, they give us grant and things like
Yes.
that. And critics would argue this affects how we go to negotiate at the table because we are going there as underdogs. Do we have the right policies to ensure that regardless of the trading partner, we're able to sit at the table as equals?
I think infrastructure is a big card that China has played, and they have really spoken to the needs that we have here. Recently, I had the privilege of flying in a helicopter to Mombasa, and we flew over the standard gauge rail, and I must say it is an incredible feat that they have accomplished. I mean, the levels of engineering standards, the extent of works that they have done within the short period of time is incredible. I think there has been a raging debate about whether we got this project at the most competitive price. I'm not competent to comment on that, but I do think that there's a need to really engage our very, very highly competent skills to negotiate these infrastructure contracts because of the volume. I mean, the values. They have a huge impact and significance on an economy such as ours, on a bearing.
Right.
And it is obviously not just for ourselves, but for posterity. It will be also our generations to come that will be meeting the cost of some of these infrastructural projects. But insofar as the deployment of this infrastructure, I think that it is fantastic. I think the focus that they have on roads, on rail networks, on sanitation, on water and energy is incredible.
Right. Finally, are there measures that can be put or to change our policy to be able to make this trade, to make it attractive for the Chinese, looking at the Kenya-China trade? Are there policies that need to be changed or altered to ensure that there's a smoother operation?
Yes, I do think that there's a need to go back to the negotiating table, particularly with respect to Kenyan exports.
Right.
There's a need to entreaty our brothers in China to look more positively towards our commodities. There's a need for the Chinese to also be more inclusive in their approach of investment, and perhaps also joint venture with Kenyan firms to develop export products for the Chinese market.
Right.
I do think that there's a great need for that, and perhaps also from a policy point of view that we really look critically at the quality of the goods that we are importing, and also perhaps have an import substitution program, because we now are at the foothold of the East African community market, and Kenya energy cost is reducing significantly.
Right.
Our road and rail networks are expanding. And I think there is a case to be made for us to have an industrial revolution in Kenya.